I'm glad that it was a short introduction. There's a very important reason why. There is a kind of understanding in the Jewish tradition, and being Jewish, that the more famous the rabbi, the shorter the introduction. So thank you for the short introduction. I was asked to come to speak to you about my unfortunate experiences. Unfortunate because I'm talking about the Holocaust, of which I was a part, and which I survived. Unfortunately, there are many of my family who did not. Most of my family did not survive. But before I do so, I must clarify what seems to be a misconception. There's a misconception that the Holocaust was a unique thing, that it stands by itself, that it has no antecedents, something before it, that it happened. A crazy man by the name of Hitler caused this struggle, but it's not quite so true. You see, the Jewish tragedy, somebody once said that Jewish history is the history of martyrology. We're going to talk about all the martyrs. It began with the ascent of a Roman emperor in the year 323, who began with the anti-Jewish laws. That was Constantine III, or Constantine the Great. And from that time on, there were throughout all ages, at every time, there were all kinds of tragedies in Jewish life. Jews were not allowed to live in any place. They had to live in a ghetto. There were, like for instance, in 1492 is famous because Columbus discovered America. 1492 was also famous because that's the year when the Jews were forced to leave Spain or get burned at the stake. Well, the better part of Belarus would be a chicken, so they left Spain. So I just really wanted to tell you that this had a long history, 1700-year history of antecedents. What was also true is that what Hitler did was so great, so tremendous in terms of its tragedy, that it stands far above anything that happened before. I survived 1945. I was liberated from a small camp called Mildorf Waldlager. And I'll tell you more about it in a minute. And struggling all my life, trying to come to the United States. I received a scholarship to come here and to study. But I never dealt with the Holocaust. I never talked about it. As a matter of fact, I even haven't told my children anything about it. I haven't told my wife. She knew that I was, came from Europe, but I haven't talked about my experiences. It was only now, after I had retired, that or even some of it before that I retired, I started to dwell more into my history or my ideas of the Holocaust. I started writing it down because when I was teaching, I asked people, do you know where you come from? Students. I was chair of sociology at Georgia State University, and the students would tell me, no, I really don't know, but I wish I would know where my grandparents came from or where we come from. I wish I would know. So I decided, you know what? I'm going to write down where I come from and my experiences, and leave it for my children or my grandchildren. I have got 6 grandsons, 4 daughters, 6 grandsons, and 4 great-grandchildren. And so I showed it to people, and they said, well, why don't you publish it? So from then on, I was very much involved in the Holocaust, talking about the Holocaust. And I was interested in 3 things. Why do we, human beings, cause miseries to others? And what are the conditions when these things rise more, you know? Second question that I was interested in is, why were we Jews sort of singled out, you know, to have all these troubles for the last 1700 years? There was a very famous rabbi. He was known as the rabbi from a small little town in Poland called Berdychev. And he was known to be a person who would go out into the forests or into the meadows and commune with God. And there is a story about that. He went out to this meadow and he was looking up to God. And he said, "Dear God, I know you wanted to bestow upon us the great treasure of singling God and making us a chosen people, but isn't it time you choose somebody else?" So the reasons, not unlike this rabbi, I wanted to find out, what is it? Why? What are the reasons that we have been, let's say, blessed with this, all the problems for 1700 years? And finally, and this is what I'm going to talk about, the question that I ask, you know, when you face tragedy, you can cry, or you can look into the tragedy and try to make sense of it. You know, Socrates said that an unexamined life is not worth living. Well, I'm not going to go that far. But it is important for our own development, you know, that we look at our experiences and make some sense out of it. You know, learn something out of it. I mean, I already paid the tuition. Might as well learn something out of it. Well, let me tell you something. Well, let me point out this one here. Commercial time. This book here is a kind of socio-autobiography about my life and my experiences. And this book here, you can look at it later on, Faith in Conflict, deals with the element of what I was telling. What are the conditions that brings to, that creates this tension that leads to Holocaust-like conditions, and why have we been experienced for so many years tragic experiences? I was very lucky. I was born to a wonderful country and a small little town. The country was Czechoslovakia when I was born. Because 13 years later it changed governments. Why was I lucky to be born in that country? Is because Czechoslovakia was one of the most liberal countries in the world. If you read Plato, let me throw in something to show you better the word, you know. If you read Plato, you know that he talked about what is really important is to have what's called a philosopher king. We in Czechoslovakia at that time, we were lucky, we did indeed have philosopher kings. The first president of Czechoslovakia was Dr. Thomas Garik Masaryk, a professor at the university in Prague. When he died, his student, Dr. Edward Benish, became president. What I like about the whole thing is that both of them were professors of sociology like I. And Czechoslovakia was a country made up of many minorities, many ethnic groups. My hometown was in the easternmost part of Czechoslovakia, in the Carpathian Mountains. A small little town of 27,000, population of 27,000. And it was called Bukačevo, or Munkac in Hungarian. 27,000 people, but of the 27,000, 17,000 or 16 to 17,000 were Jewish people. So what you could call it was a Jewish town. when it came Friday and the Sabbath was coming, the public steam bathroom was, they would blow the whistle. You knew that this is Sabbath. Doors were being locked. People left their homes, went home to get ready for the Sabbath, And on the Sabbath, like it used to be here 50 years ago, everything was closed. There, everything was closed on the Sabbath in my hometown. Not because you had to, but because we wanted, because this was what we did. I grew up in that town. I grew up there, and I went to we had 5 different nationalities living there. Besides the Jewish people, you had Russians or Ruthenians, you had Czechs, and you had Germans, and you had Hungarians. And all of these different nationalities had their own schools. This is what I said about being liberal. I went to a school where the language of instruction was Hebrew, not Yiddish, Hebrew. The language they speak right now in Israel. I grew up, went from 1st grade through 12th grade. I studied all day long, 6 days a week in public school, and then in the afternoon I studied religious studies. Together with my father had a rabbi, and I studied all the Talmud and all the things like that too. 1938, Hitler was threatening war. So Chamberlain, who was the Prime Minister of England, Daladier, who was the Prime Minister of France, Mussolini from Italy, and Hitler got together, and Chamberlain tried to appease, Hitler, and he gave Hitler part of Czechoslovakia as a kind of a way to try to get him away from war, There used to be a story told about Hitler, that Hitler really was a man who liked peace. He wanted a piece of Czechoslovakia, a piece of Poland, and so on. Well, in November of 1938, the Hungarians marched into my hometown, and from then on, it became part of Hungary. But by that time, Hungary, as an ally of Germany, already had anti-Jewish laws. For instance, only 7% of the people were allowed to have businesses. 7% of the population could have business. Jewish people could have, businesses. Now, here you take a city where 2/3 of the population was Jewish, which meant is that most Jewish people lost their livelihood. My uncles lost their livelihood. Luckily, my father kept a store, and suddenly we had to feed, we had to help a lot of other people, who depended upon our store. People would ask me questions and say, why didn't you leave? I mean, when things were getting bad, why didn't you just back up and leave? Well, I tried to. I was 13 years old, and I wrote to my uncle here in St. Louis, and I sent him my birth certificate and picture and this and that. I said, take me out. But he didn't do it. I don't know. Well, I guess he wanted me to stay with my parents, Jews have always felt, and throughout all the time, that, like you say here down south, if you just hunker down, this too shall pass. And so we hunker down. If you don't rock the boat, don't become too visible, don't argue with non-Jews, don't raise any questions, just keep aside. And things look good. 1943, and early in January, sort of in February of 1944, we saw the light at the end of the tunnel. America and England had defeated the Germans and the Italians in North Africa. America was already invading and succeeding in Italy, and we were waiting possibilities that the war will be soon over and life will again begin, you know, and we were sort of looking forward. But alas, it didn't happen. March of 1944, I walked out of the house and I was going to the store. I graduated from high school, but I could not go to a university because no Jews were allowed to enter the university. So I went to work in my dad's store, and I was walking. I see all these German soldiers in the town. And I found out what happened was that Germany did not like what Hungary was doing, that they were not doing enough. What Hitler wanted was to make Europe Judenrein, free of Jews, you know. So they came and they invaded Hungary, and they disillusioned the government, and Germany started ruling Hungary also. A few days after the Germans came in, we were told that all Jewish stores must close, that they cannot have open, and they created a ghetto. And you know, probably, you know what a ghetto is. A place where you, here in the United States, you always think of a ghetto, a place where it's black people live, right? This is called a ghetto. But really, just to give you where we get the word ghetto. If you ever go to Italy and you go to Venice, Venice is a city of small islands. They have two islands in Venice. They're called Ghetto Vecchio, the old ghetto, and Ghetto Nuevo, the new ghetto. And it was the island which was called Ghetto. And in 1400, the Venetians forced the Jews to leave wherever they lived, and they were allowed to settle only on these two islands, the islands of the ghetto. And from then on, the word ghetto started meaning, you know, a place where you have an ethnic groups. But in reality, ghettos in Europe were places that were fenced about, and the Jews had to live within that fenced-in area. The first high-rises occurred there because as the people multiplied, you couldn't get more territory, so you had to build up higher. So you had the first, I said, the first really high rises, particularly in Germany and the Frankfurt ghetto. Sometimes my jokes don't go with Students used to tell me, keep your day job, you know, you're not going to make this So we had to move into a ghetto. My home fell into the ghetto area, so everybody else came to live with us. But we didn't stay in the ghetto too long. One day, it was a Friday morning, we all woke up early in the morning with the sound of gunfire. I look outside the window and I see Hungarian soldiers, German soldiers and police milling about going into houses, and I soon found out what it was. They came into our house. As they walked in, they had their guns to take, you know, to get our attention, make sure that we get our attention. They started firing into the ceiling. That's what woke me up from all the places. And then they came to my father, and using the butt of their rifle, they hit him. And since I was an 18-year-old boy, they came to me too, and they hit me also. And then they told us, pack up anything that you can carry with you and be outside on the street in 15 minutes. So what do you pack up? a change of clothes. You pick up some jewelry. Why jewelry? Not because you wanted to look good, but because jewelry is a commodity that you can use as bribe, you know? And maybe if you're hungry, you can exchange jewelry for food. So you took jewelry along. And of course, you took food. We walked outside. I carried a suitcase with a rucksack and a backpack on my back. And there I was there, my father, my mother, I, my brother Benjamin, and my sister Esther. And with everybody else on the street, standing there, Germans out there with their submachine guns, and we marched outside of the city to a brick factory, and they deposited us in shelters. And you know, when you make bricks, you make it from clay. And then you put the bricks under a sheltered, you know, from the rain, an area, so that it can dry before you bake it. It had no walls, but all it had was a roof. And so that's where they deposited us to wait for the trains to come to take us away. Well, for 3 days we stayed there. And meanwhile, suddenly I see my grandmother coming in. She lived far into a small little tiny village up in the middle of the Carpathian Mountains, the border there. And indeed, a day later, the trains came, the infamous cattle cars and other kind of cars like that, not passenger cars. We were herded into these cars. You know, they all have 4 little bitty windows there, and all of these windows were barbed wire, lest somebody might try to escape. They locked at the doors, chained around the door, and padlocked. And off we went. It was about maybe second night, as we were on our way someplace. We didn't know where. My mother takes out the rucksack, the backpack, and takes out some bread and some sausage and cuts a slice of bread, hands it to me, to my brother and my sister, and a little bit of meat. And I noticed that she's crying. And I say, Mother, why are you crying? She said, Son, well, my nickname she called me Tully. She said, Tully, let me tell you, I had a wonderful life. I lived with your father for 20-some odd years. We had a very good life. I'm crying because of you children. You didn't have a chance yet to have life at all. You know, sometimes things remain in your mind. They are clear as it could be. It's engraved. And this is one of those episodes that is engraved in my mind that I will never forget. Later on, early in the morning, pitch dark outside the train stop, I look out through this little window there, and all I could see was 3 huge fires and a peculiar odor coming from the outside. But nothing was moving outside, nothing, so we just sat there and waited. As the sun rose, we heard the words aussteigen, which means get out of the train, get off, aussteigen. And indeed, somebody came and unlocked our doors. You heard the chains being moved away. The door was opened up, and the German SS with his weapon says aussteigen, meaning get out. So I go out and I look around, where am I? There were 2 rows of buildings. The train was here, and I was standing on the tarmac next to the train. And I look around, and there was one group of buildings, and on the roof of that building, there is a slogan. famous slogan, you must have heard of it, called Arbeit macht frei. Work makes you free. On the other buildings, there was another slogan. Arbeit macht das Leben süß. Work makes your life sweet. The height of cynicism. You know, in fact, there was an old inmate standing next to me, and a plane was flying overhead, and he said, "Oh, dear God, if that plane would just, drop bombs and kill us all." I said, "Why do you want to die?" And he says, "You'll find out, you'll find out." Anyway, what we are told suddenly comes the rumor. When we were supposed to be divided, women on one side, to the left, men on the right side, and I was sitting there with my father, my brother, and my sister went with my mother, and I and my uncles, and I had another cousin there. There comes this rumor, or people talking, there will be an officer coming in, will look at some young boys, and he will ask, he'll ask you, how old is he? Tell them that he is 16. Because if he's not 16, they'll call him out and take him away. And indeed comes an SS, and he looks at my brother and says, "How old is he?" My father says, 16. "When was he born?" And he gives the appropriate year, but he miscalculated. He said, "In June, the 20th. I said, "Oh, the German, your brother will be 16. And takes him away. And I've never seen him since then, of course. Down the end of the row stood a man clad in a leather coat, long leather coat, and all he's doing is just moving his fingers like this. And as we came closer to him, we later found out that it was Dr. Mengele, and the angel of death, so to say. And he looks at me and my father, and he turns to the right and looks at one of my uncles, Michael, who had one leg shorter than the other one. He limped, and turns him to the left. Those who went to the right went to live. Those who went to the left were gassed and killed and burned. So we went to the right. We come into a courtyard there, and the order is, get undressed. This is the end of March, and it's cold, but you get undressed. And there is a gauntlet of people standing there, and we have to pass that gauntlet. These guys had electric shavers, these huge ones that you use for shaving sheep, and they come to us, not to us, at us with these devices, and they cut my hair off, cut all of our hair. We are naked. The only thing we were allowed to keep were our shoes. They cut my hair off, they cut my pubic hair off, everything, and asked, "What are you doing?" Delousing. And there was another guy there with a mop in his hand, kind of a handheld mop, and he dumped into foul, smelly black liquid, and he comes at us and he touches us in the appropriate places. That's supposed to have kept the lice out. Well, to tell you the truth, we were not lousy then, but later on we became. I was standing in line at one time, and I was almost crying, not from the pain, but from the millions of lice that were on me. I could go inside like this and fill up my hand and just throw it away like that. But anyway, we were told to go into a room. There was a shower room, to take a shower, and we go over in there, and I take my shoes like everybody else, and I put my shoes in the corner, have my shower, and come back to pick up my shoes, to retrieve my shoes, and I look around, and somebody took a shoe for me and left me with two right shoes. Now, if he would have left me a right shoe that was much larger, probably I could have squeezed my left foot into it. But the shoe was smaller than mine, and here I am with two shoes of the same size, shoe one smaller, and I asked one of the capos, we call the supervisors capos, and I asked one of the capos, what can I do now? He says, you see that window over there? I said, yes. And he says, go over to that window, knock at the window, and ask for a pair of shoes. However, before you say anything, you must use the following words. You must say, Ich bete gehorsam, which means I'm humbly requesting for a pair of shoes. So I go to the window, I knock at the window opens up, and in there, a small little room, there were two people, another inmate, and an SS with his gun. Now the inmate with this, uniform, the striped pajamas like blue pajamas, like a uniform, comes over to me, and under his arm he carries a huge stick, almost like an Irish shillelagh, gnarled and mean looking, and his face was mean looking, and he comes to me and he hits me over the head first, and then he says, what do you want? So I remembered what I was instructed. I said to him, Ich bete gehorsam, I'm humbly requesting a pair of shoes. He hits me over the head, and he closes the window. And I walk back to my father crying. There are many things that hurt. Pain, physical pain, is not necessarily the thing that can hurt you more. I was crying, not so much because I was hit in the head, and believe me, you get hit in the head, it hurts. I can tell you that. But I was crying, the hurt didn't matter, I was crying out of frustration. And I come to my father and I blurt out this question, and I said, Dad, how is it possible, I asked him, how is it possible that now in the middle of the 20th century, this was 1944, after we have made such great discoveries in science, in medicine, theology, philosophy, psychology, we are still so inhuman to each other. Why are we inhuman? Well, of course, he didn't have the answer. And I never asked him, and I never thought about the question that I asked my father. But it became an important question because later on, after I was freed from the German concentration camp, when I was liberated, later on when I was a professor, it came back to me. It never left me. But I was busy with, even after liberation, to find food to eat, to get to America, to go and get my education, start a family, to reconstruct my life. And only later on I came back to the question. This is one episode that stayed in my mind and what led me to raise questions. What is it? How can we eliminate this condition that makes us becoming so inhumane? I'll give you the answer a little bit later. Let me right now go to another episode that I would like to share with you. The place that where I was when I came in, was a part of Auschwitz called Birkenau. That was the extermination camp. I stayed in Birkenau for a week, and then we were sent to Warsaw, Poland. I cannot tell you all the things that happened to me at that time. May I suggest? We were worked in the Warsaw ghetto. The Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto rose up against the Germans. And for 8 glorious days they fought the Germans. And then the Germans defeated all the Jews. They came in. They dynamited all the houses in the ghetto. They brought us in, and our job was to clean the bricks. They were sending the bricks to Berlin. The project was called Berlin Aufbau. I was given specific instructions. Oh my God. Can I extend it a little bit? And you see, Berlin was being destroyed. So they were going to use these bricks, to rebuild Berlin, called Berlin Aufbau, rebuilding Berlin. But the Russians were coming fast and furious, and they were at the gates of Warsaw. One day when we came back from work, the commandant, camp commandant, a German officer, said to us, tomorrow you will be taken away from here. However, we don't have transportation. You will have to march 100 kilometers where you will embark on a train which will take you away from here. However, we know that some of you may not be able to walk 100 kilometers. Those who feel they cannot walk 100 kilometers, please step out. We will provide transport only for those who will provide transportation. I was standing next to my friend, a classmate, Friedman. Janci was his name in Hungarian. And he said, I'm going to step out. I said, fool. Do you believe them that they're going to provide you with transportation? Haven't you learned yet what the Germans are? Yeah, I'm going to step out. And there were a number of such people who were fools, and they stepped out. They were put into a march. They marched them out of the camp. Outside of the walls of the camp, I heard the sound of da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and never to be seen again. Next morning, we started walking. It was in August of 1944, and it is hot. All we had that we carried with us was a blanket. I had a metal dish, a metal dish, and a spoon. And so the night before it rained, and we were taking on these muddy roads, really back roads, And every time I saw a big puddle, luckily I was around the first, camp, a few people, I would bend down. I couldn't bend down those days, not like now. But I would bend down and take some muddy water, and I would drink it. There were people who could not make it with the thirst. They could not march like that. They sent down, the Germans would come, shoot them, and that was it. By nightfall, early we arrived to a place. It was next to a river. Some of the people with us jumped rank and they ran into the river to drink. We were all completely and utterly dehydrated. So as they jumped ran to the river, the Germans started shooting. And they told, get out, get out. Some of them were killed. So the Germans put a number of SS guards in the middle of the river, and then we were divided into small little groups, and we were told to go in, have 5 minutes to drink. I had my 5 minutes with my father, we drank, and then we walked out. We came to the banks of the river, a bit further in from the banks of the river. We had to lie down. We would lie down anyway because we were so tired. We walked 50 kilometers, which is a long walk. It's, about 30-some-odd miles, And I fell asleep. And in my dream, I I was back in my home. The bathroom, the faucets were all open. The kitchen, the faucets were all open, and water was coming all over, you know. What does that hungry chicken dream of? I was dreaming of water. I wake up. My father looks at me. I was doing something. My father looks at me and said, "What are you doing?" So what was I doing? I had a spoon. I had my metal dish. And I was digging the ground. I said, "What is he saying? What are you doing?" I said, "I'm digging a well." Crazy, out of my mind, digging a well with a spoon? What is he going to say? Don't? You know. And I dig, and I dig. And after about 8 or 10 inches or more, the topsoil is gone, and underneath it there is sand. And I keep on digging further and further into the sand. Suddenly, the sand gets dark and wet, and dig more, and suddenly I see something coming up from that sand. Water. I'm not Moses, and it didn't hit a rock either. So I let this water seep into the cavity. Take my little metal dish, fill it up with water, hand it to my father. I still had enough to remember the 5th commandment, the 5th of the 10 commandments, honor thy father and mother, and making an appropriate blessing. You know, blessed is the Lord our God, King of the universe, who created everything. We took a sip of water. And the people around me who saw what I was doing and what happened, everybody started digging holes. And there was, right there in like in the Old Testament, in the desert, they were digging holes and holes and holes. And indeed, everybody was having water. The camp commandant came, and he looked at me, and he said, "Now that you have water," I was lying down there, and he looked so tall, you know, when you look up like that. He was in his A1 boots, shiny boots, and he had his fur coat, you know, with Persian color around him. He says, "Now if you found water, you might as well have it. Gracious of the listeners." I wanted to tell you these two things, because from these two things, later on I want to tell you what I learned from this. To begin with, when I became a professor, I was teaching, one of my first courses, I was teaching back in the 1950s. I was teaching a course in race and ethnic relations, and the buzzword at that time was tolerance. And the idea was that if we learn to be tolerant of each other, then maybe we will not have to experience these kinds of difficulties as I have experienced. You know? But I want to tell you something. I learned something, that tolerance is a nice thing, but tolerance does not make things better for a group of so people. You know, I had a friend, I used to be a photographer of sorts, you know, and he was a very good photographer, but he shouted all the time. He was deaf a little bit, and he just shouted. And I tolerated his shouting, because he was a friend. But you know, tolerance is not really what we want, what we need to create a better world. Oh, it's nice to have it. I learned that my wife, that I'm married now 63 years, she tolerated me a great deal. But it's not tolerance. What we need is the Old Testament idea of justice. You see, If I tolerate you, it means I am better than you, right? I am the great guy. I'm going to tolerate you. I don't want anybody to tolerate me. I do not want you, I don't want anybody, the government, to tolerate me or have the, people tolerate me because I'm a Jew. What I want is my right, the constitutional right, justice, that every person should get the right to exist. And I wrote about that. Somebody read my article of Love and Justice. I cannot go through the whole thing right now. No, it's not my time. And from the water incident, I want to tell you something a little bit about the water incident, what I learned from that. Ladies and gentlemen, when there is trouble, when your life is down and out, there are two things which we have learned that is essential to be able to withstand life in itself. Faith and hope. Those are two essential qualities without which mankind cannot exist. Faith and trust and hope. You know, when I was in high school, I had to read a book, a play. I read by a Hungarian playwright called Madách. It was called The Tragedy of Humanity. And in that story, in that play, Adam is put to sleep by God. Adam falls asleep. Adam sees, God shows him the future of mankind, and all it is one tragedy after the other. Enslavement, and this, and this, and that. And Adam wakes up and he says to himself, he says, look, I'm going to commit suicide, and that's the end of mankind, and nobody will have to be suffering anymore. Well, we know mankind, so you don't have to suffer. So his wife, Eve, wakes up and sweetly comes to him and she whispers into his ear that she's pregnant. Bah, I'm foiled. My suicide is going to be for naught, right? Mankind is here to stay, so he bitterly cries out to God. He said, to God, what is the fate of men? What shall we do? And God speaks to Adam and he says, Adam, you shall surely struggle, but never give up hope. I've learned that lesson. I've learned that lesson that without hope and without any faith in the existence and in my attachment to a transcendental entity, whatever that transcendental entity may be, and I'm not going to discuss it, of course, right now, but you have to have a tie with that. These are the things which I wanted to come and tell you. And with your permission, Reverend, just a little ending. The last day of my being in camp in Howard when I was liberated, I was in the mountains, in the foothills of the Alps, my last camp, called Waldlager. And the commandant came one day when we came back from work, and we had a lot of people who were dead already. That's the whole story. He says, tomorrow trains will come and all the Jews will be taken out from here. Only the people in the hospital and the non-Jews will remain in camp. Now, to me, when you said only the non-Jews will remain in camp, the best place to be therefore in the hospital, because they're going to sing. I had an in, because my uncle was a physician and he was the head of the hospital. It was a room that you went to die, because, they had no medicine anyway. So that night, I snuck out of the hole in the wall, really a hole in the wall where we lived. And I crawled over to the hospital and I entered. Next day, all the Jews were taken away. A day after that was May the 2nd of 1945. I wake up to the sound of machine gun, the rifle fire, occasional boom, boom, boom of big, heavy cannons. The war has come here. While all this is going in, it comes in an SS, a young SS lieutenant comes in, and he walks right to me, and I said, what in the world does he want from me? He takes out a piece of paper and hands it to me, and in that, in German, was written, I, so-and-so, attest that Lieutenant, whatever his name was, I can't remember, and said that he was good to the Jews. Now, you think I'm going to write it? I'm going to translate this and sign it? But he still had his gun on, right there. He just he said he can pick up the gun and shoot me. How in the world, how do I save myself? So I look at it, as I told him, Lieutenant, me no speak good English. This is too much, I cannot translate this. He picks up the paper and walks away. And I go, well, about 20 minutes later or so, and suddenly, it's quiet out in the courtyard. You couldn't hear anything. We couldn't look out the windows because the windows were all painted. You couldn't look out. So we walked to the door, opened the door a smidgen, and looked out, and all the Germans were gone. All the people up in the parapet surrounding the camp with machine guns, all was dismantled. Nobody out there. So we opened the door and we walk out. And then we are milling about. What are we going to do? For over a year, you ate when they gave you to eat, you did what they told you to do. Here I am. Does anybody know we are here? Does anybody care? Will we get any food? All we just could do is just mill about, not even talking to each other. Suddenly we hear the sound of a tank and a car. So we walk out, open the gates, and the sign was still above there, Arbeit macht frei, you know. We walk out, and on the road there, indeed, there was a tank and there was a jeep. We walk over to the jeep, and there's a lieutenant there with a squad of soldiers from later on, I know, from the 3rd Army, 14th Armored Division. And he says, does anybody speak English? I said, yeah, I speak English. And he says to me, I am Lieutenant Schwartz. Schwartz? Lieutenant Schwartz? My kind of people? My kind of Schwartzes? And I said to him, my name is Eugen Schoenfeld. For over a year, I had no name. 90,138, that was my number. You know, suddenly I reacquired the name, at least temporarily until I came to the United States. Now they don't ask me my name, they ask me, what's your social number? But I reacquired my name. I was a person again. I was a human being again. I was me, Eugen Schoenfeld. And he asked me some questions, so I talked to him. And I want to mark this day. I want to say something, you know. Remember, like Dr. Livingston, I presume, you know, the Samuel Livingston. I want to say something that it would be meaningful and that would be this momentous occasion of being liberated. But I found the right words. I had the exact right words. And I said to him, Lieutenant, do you have a cigarette? Well, thank you so much. I've outdone my time by 15 minutes. But, you know, it's difficult to tell a story in a very short time. I just wanted to add this ending. Then I can joke now about my life there. I can look at it back with a little humor about my experiences. But the meaning of these experiences, the significance of justice, the importance of faith and hope, all those things I wanted to share with you. For you cannot go on in life without having these things to you. Freedom means justice. Personal freedom cannot exist without hope and without faith. Thank you very much. You have been a wonderful audience.